Thank you very much, David. What I'll do is invite people to put that to raise their hands. I'm just trying to check that I can see it. And so people just can go ahead. Actually, just go ahead because it's. I think Josh has got his hand up.
All right. Yeah, I've got a question. So thank you very much for this very informative talk. I'm really looking forward to getting the slides later. What do you say to part of your talk, you talked about the importance of the clinical judgment of doctors. But what do you say to psychiatrists who, in their experience and clinical judgment, have had positive experiences? They see that people take the SSRIs and they do better, right?
I'm going on that judgment. There are people that do better. I use the SSRIs. This is not an anti-drug or an anti-vaccine talk, okay? I use these drugs with figure that if you're really going to use them well, you need to know when to use them, which is not indiscriminately. And if things go wrong, if you're giving a person a poison, you've got to recognize when they get poisoned and shouldn't be too surprised. They can be helped. And the question about the helping in its own right is a tricky thing, in that if we gave both Norman and me an SSRI, I might feel emotionally numbed and figure that's a good thing, it works for me. Norman might have exactly the same thing, and it's really bad. This is not helping me at all. This is not the kind of thing that would be good for me. So, but the judgment, I mean, one of the points I made in the middle of the talk was, if you give a person like me an SSRI and you're chilled out in a way that can be useful, other people, including patients, forget doctors, they don't have to be experts. This is, you can see the effects. So yes, absolutely, people's experience is important. But what we're talking about is, in an individual patient, I might have had, like for instance, I knew about the sexual side effects of SSRIs for ages, but had the conventional story about what happens on these drugs. You can be on the drugs and then you halt the drugs if you want to go away for a romantic weekend and things are just fine. Or you might find the sexual side effects work for some people, some men who have a premature ejaculation problem. The effects of the drugs can help that. But you'll have a case where, as I had, where a lady comes in and says, I was on this drug and it worked reasonably well for me, but I had sexual side effects. And I'll say, well, yes, these things can happen, but they clear up once you halt the drug. And she says, no, I stopped this drug 3 months ago, and I can take a hard bristle brush and rub it up and down my genitals and feel nothing. Now, in that case, this was new to me and didn't fit my experience at all. But the issue is, making a judgment call. It took me a while. I said, look, we're going to have to meet again. We'll try Viagra and see if it makes a difference, So we did a few things to try and work it out. But her view was that the drug had caused it and it didn't seem to be going away. And I ended up thinking the same way as her. And this is how you move science forward. There's a Nobel Prize to be won out of just this observation, but most doctors in their clinical experience don't see it. People can kill themselves outside the doctor's office, and they, literally kill themselves outside the doctor's office in the same building. They can go up to the 45th floor and jump off the roof, having seen the doctor half an hour beforehand, and the doctor's missed it. So you've got to have a degree of openness. You've got to do, as I said, be with the patient and leave experience is great to bring to bear on it, but you've got to be there, prepared to leave all your experience behind and listen to the patient and try and work out what's going on. And if you don't think it's what the patient says is going on, you try and persuade them. You don't browbeat them. You don't tell them, I'm never going to see you again if you stop taking this drug. You may have patients who are on the drug, and every time they try to stop, they feel suicidal. And they come in, and if I say to them, look, maybe you shouldn't be on this drug much longer, they say, well, no, this drug has saved my life, and I'm going to remain on it for as long as I live. But, you've got a job with them trying to explain, well, one of the possibilities here is that you're going into withdrawal. and this is what you think. I mean, the drug is saving your life, but it's not for the reason you think it's saving your life. So there's all these things. I mean, I'm not saying it's a simple situation, but I am saying some of the deaths on the vaccines are extraordinarily simple, and 12-year-olds could make the judgment call. But we've got very few doctors stepping up to the plate and saying, it's obvious this vaccine has killed my patient, or whatever.
Okay, you've got Layla.
Hi, doctor. Thank you for the presentation. I think I'm hearing overall like this contradiction, this tension between evidence-based medicine and I guess prior forms of practicing medicine where there was more, I mean, all the weight was on clinical judgment, like the kind of the experience of the clinician in question to make a judgment call. It seems like your approach is kind of leaning back towards that earlier approach before EBM kind of took over the medical field, like in the 90s. So what are your thoughts on this contradiction? Like, how can we move toward reconciling the advances of evidence-based medicine with what you're talking about here, all the limitations of it?
What I'm talking about is this, that the only time we have all the data there in the room, that I have all of the data there in the room, is when the patient's right in front of me. All the data is there. If I do a weight loss trial, I'm just looking at the weight the patient has, nothing else about the life. If I'm doing an antidepressant trial of a depression checklist to fill, I'm abstracting bits of things out about the patient, but I don't have all of the data the way I have when the patient is in the room there with me. And if it may be useful in the case of running a clinical trial to make this abstraction, provided you realize you're doing something terribly artificial with a goal of finding out something more about one of the things that the drug does that's in doubt. You do not do a controlled trial for parachutes or drugs antibiotics that help people get off their deathbed and walk. It's when the drug, the treatment effect is in doubt that it may be useful to do a controlled trial, but you're going to really mess things up if, as a result of the controlled trial, which may give you an answer that's useful, you think you know everything about the drug, because you don't. You just know a lot more than we knew about one of the 100 things. And in fact, it can be close to 1,000 things that the drug does. And to think that we know all about what this drug has done based on that is just wrong. And it's not actually scientific. So my point of view is it's not anti-evidence-based medicine, it's pro-science. And I'm trying to draw attention. I mean, I'm not talking about the art of medicine or anything pre-EBM. I'm talking about the rules of evidence that are used in a legal case, which are awfully strict, just as strict as any scientist uses. And out of this, in the case of me and the patient, we may come to a provisional view about whether the drug caused the harm or not. And as with any scientific view, this may be wrong. And there should be encouragement to, go after it and try and prove it's wrong. Try a different drug from the same group and see what happens. Try a completely different drug altogether and see what happens. But this is the way science works. For instance, when I give people who are on an SSRI and they become suicidal, let's say I later give them an antibiotic like doxycycline and they become suicidal. That observation led me to get a colleague to check out the profile of what this drug does. And what do you know? It's a serotonin reuptake inhibitor. So there's nothing anti-science. I'm pro-science. I'm saying RCTs, even if done by angels, are, as Tony Hill said, they're a great club to have in the golf bag. But if they're the only club you have in the golf bag, you're not going to play a good round of golf. You've got to have a full range of clubs. So, but quite aside from what he was saying, which is RCTs can be useful, but they're of limited use. We now have, what doctors fail to realize is that people encouraging them to practice evidence-based medicine, as Tony Hill said in his 1965 talk, the people who go around the place asking doctors in 1965, have you read the latest controlled trial of the pharmaceutical industry? Doctors seem to miss the fact that people encouraging them to practice EBM is not the scientists around the place, It's the pharmaceutical companies who have a vested interest. Like, they aren't angels. I'm saying even if they were angels, they can make a mistake with RCTs. It's still good to have them, just like it's good to have SSRIs. But once the pharmaceutical companies get their hands on them, they really make them work for them, not for us.
Can I ask a follow-up?
Sure. Cool.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was a great answer. Okay, so I guess something I've been really struggling with through this entire pandemic, and I'm in Ontario, where it's just been insane with the vaccine pushes and all these things, is that I agree with you that I think, especially with regards to these vaccines, given the fact that the morbidity mortality of this disease is so minor, it doesn't make sense. A mass vaccination doesn't make sense to me. It would be more helpful, it seems, to take a more individualized approach. And I'm hearing from you that, it seems like it's like this for a lot of medicines. And so, I mean, I wonder, is there a place for public health, like in the sense that we understand it when it comes to any medicine at all? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
That's a great question, and really potent, but I'm not sure I quite have an answer to it. My first instinctive answer, and this has been recorded and it probably shouldn't be recorded, but public health people, like psychiatrists like me, are otherwise failed doctors. And at the moment, public health seems to have drifted into a slightly tin pot dictator mode. We now have power and we can do things we never dreamt we'd be able to do. And the outcomes are not wonderful. In terms of should we have public health? Well, yes, I think we should, but and they have an input. But at the moment, in terms of the real world evidence, for instance, as I understand it, respiratory people, kind of specialists in this area, don't get access to the data that public health get access to. And public health aren't collecting the data that respiratory people say they need. So we're not really joined up here. I don't get the sense public health are open. They want everybody to have full access to all the data to see what the picture really looks like, and to see what a person like me, who feels very like what you just outlined there, would make of it. I mean, suicide issue and SSRIs taught me a lot, which is, people can trot out, you've got lots of people employed by industry who do a bit of thinking and trot out some real world evidence which shows that it's a great thing to take SSRIs. In the same way, we're having a lot of real world evidence trotted out that seems to be incompatible with the trials that were done, which show more dead people in the trials on the active agent than on placebo. And the real picture is probably worse. So how do we get from there to the real world evidence we're shown? And I'd love to be able to answer that question. I'm not saying that I have the answers. I just think if we're being scientific, we really all should have access to the data and be able to come to a view. Let me put it like this to you. One of the issues for me is pregnant women, and should they take SSRIs? And a lot of them are on SSRIs these days. There's big campaigns. You absolutely should be on your SSRIs. If you've got a moment of depression during the pregnancy, you're going to harm your child. The epidemiological evidence is that these drugs double the rate of miscarriages, double the rate of birth defects, double the rate of behavioral abnormalities in children, and increased rates of voluntary termination. And even if I tell the Pope or people who claim to be anti-abortion, do you not think we should have warnings about these drugs? They don't go near it. They aren't interested. They just leap up and down, are anti-abortion, but don't want to look at either the vaccines or the drugs causing this. And my view on this, and this comes to the public health issue, every woman who I think they largely support this. There should be a registry of all the drugs that they're on before they get pregnant and through the pregnancy. And everybody, particularly pregnant women, men could be left out of the equation completely, should be left, look at the data that comes out and assess for themselves what they think it means in terms of the risks they're willing to take. I mean, it's all about how can we help people live the lives they want to live, rather than helping them live lives that actually make a lot of money for Pfizer or whoever.
Okay, Eric's had his hand up for a while.
Dr. Healy, hi, can you hear me?
I can.
Excellent. I am a general practitioner, rural clinician in Queensland. And currently, I'm not sure if you're aware or not, but we're going through a mandate that, a bit of background, when COVID first came out, I looked after an outbreak at a nursing home as one of 2 doctors in the region. We set up a virtual hospital so that we could look after patients in their homes if needed. And I looked after our first 8 COVID patients virtually. With that background, I'm being stood down because in my general practice, I began seeing patients and listening to them and seeing that what my presentations were from the patients weren't stacking with the data. So I chose to not have the vaccine. And because of that, I'm being stood down from both the hospital as well as my ability to look after patients in the general practice. With that being said, I'm not giving up the fight. And I would really appreciate maybe some practical ideas from yourself or others in this forum on what I can do to continue to try to enlighten local public health as well as my fellow colleagues that we one solution isn't the solution. So if you've got any practical things like I'm doing full blood panels on patients for lymphocyte subtypes and immunoglobulins, et cetera, for those that are going to have the vaccine. So baseline beforehand, post first vaccine, post second vaccine. Is there anything else that you've come across or any ideas that you have that could help me help my patients?
There's 2 ideas. One is just from my point of view, I think the focus should be on the harms. The companies and Joe Biden and all these people talk about the efficacy. These things work wonderfully well and are going to save your life. But it's actually the harms, and it's the people who have been harmed that I've met a lot and assessed a lot, who have inspired me. With both the vaccines and the SSRIs, and they're the ones that actually do the science. I think supporting them to get involved in the issues, I think is crucially important, because when you've been injured, you've got skin in the game and you've got motivation, and that can be worth a lot more than expertise. It's a bit like pregnant women looking at the pregnancy registry. They're motivated to get it right. Whatever expertise they had to begin with is useful, but it's not the key thing. It's the motivation that's the key thing. The other factor from my point of view is that when it comes to efficacy and things like that, the real world evidence that, it's very hard to make cases that will stand up because the government and all the experts on their side can make the alternative case. We've seen and things like that. And the courts and everybody else will come down on, in this crisis, will come down on the side of the government. They may not feel the government's right, but in a crisis, they've got to side with them, kind of thing. But what the government cannot, it seems to me, this is a poison pill for the government, is to get out with the public and say, well, the trials that we're talking about here were run by contract research organizations in some pretty shady places, and they're ghostwritten, and there's no access to the data. One of the tropes that has had a huge effect was Aaron Siri, when he came out with this idea that we will get the data from the Pfizer trial in 55 years' time. That's one of the things that really got through to a lot of the public. And it's things like that that I think are crucially important, but also adding in the idea that it's not just the vaccines, it's every pill you're taking. It applies to statins, it applies to your osteoporosis drugs, it applies to your asthma drugs, it applies to all of them. Now, I'm not saying these drugs don't work, because I use them and you do too. But the issue is trying to wake the public up to the fact that these things are ghostwritten, trying to wake scientists like physicists and chemists up saying, yeah, you guys have the right to go on articles. We in medicine don't. They're written for us. And waking up, they think they're supporting the vaccines because they think medical science is like physical science and chemistry. It's the real thing, and you have to support that, when it's not. It's waking people up to this extra element of the thing, which it seems to me the government, however pro-vaccine they are, cannot endorse lack of access to the data, because it's just not science if there's no access, and cannot support ghostwriting.
Thank you.
Thanks. Just before, Shabnam's had a hand up, but just on that point, I wanted to ask you about the whole ghostwritten thing, because that was actually an incredible revelation to me. I may be naive, but I was actually quite shocked by that, because that seems to suggest, a kind of like a fraud at the heart of this, which I simply, which is presumably initiated by the pharma companies, which I was simply not aware of. But what I don't understand about it is why the many people named on the articles don't, who you're saying maybe didn't even contribute to them, but they're just there for their good names. Why aren't any of them speaking out about this?
Well, that's interesting. One of the quick points to make is study 329, which I majored on, probably looks like a bad trial to you guys, but compared to the vaccine trials, there were no contract research organizations involved. It was a much more ethical and principled trial than the vaccine trials are. But it ended up being an obvious fraud and got a $3 billion fine, which at the time was the largest fine of its kind in corporate history. But this is standard industry practice. And, we've let this grow up over 30 years from the point that from just before the point the SSRIs came on the market first. It's grown up slowly, and it's been like bindweed. It's kind of grown the whole time and choked things off. And it's got to the point where I've written to ministers for health across the UK, but across the Western European archipelago, because I've written to them in Ireland also, and to the NICE guideline bosses and to the MHRA and to the BMA and they all say, we recognize what you're talking about, but what can we do about it? And they reach for a life belt that I throw to them, which is, I throw it to them, but they leap on it, which is that it's not their job to police the medical literature. And this is why it's so interesting. You get Eric Rubin recently in the New England Journal of Medicine saying, well, I'm the editor of the New England Journal of Medicine. It's not my job to police the medical literature either. And this isn't just a recent thing. The New England Journal of Medicine have been saying this for nearly 20 years. If the New York Times were to publish a story and it turned out that the sources didn't exist or were not reliable, the journalist that wrote the story would be fired. But the New England Journal of Medicine, you can publish stuff where the patients don't exist, where doctors end up in jail for recruiting patients that didn't exist to the trial, and the New England Journal of Medicine is happy to publish it. One of the tropes that might get through to people was something in the area of that if our clinical trials were published in the New York Times rather than the New England Journal of Medicine, we might all be a lot safer. The only other thing that gets through to doctors, that the people who are failing you are doctors like me. We are, the one thing that gets through to them is when I say to them, look, if you don't change this, if you don't step up to the plate, you're going to be out of business because you're very expensively paid for doing nothing, not really engaging to help patients live the life they want to live. You're feeding them to Pfizer. And hey, this is not the way forward.
Okay, so Shabnam.
Hi, thanks very much. So my name is Shabnam Palesa Mohammed from South Africa. Thank you, Dr. Healy. And I wear a few caps. I'm the head of Trial Site News Africa. My colleague Daniel O'Connor was here just now. I'm also on the steering committee of the World Council for Health, and both David Wiseman and Jessica Rose have spoken there recently and gave brilliant discussions. So there's a couple of points I want to talk to you about and then offer an invitation. It's very clear, and I've done interviews with people like Dr. Peter Bregan, and he has many years of course, challenging the whole field of psychiatry, Prozac, for example, teenagers becoming violent and killing people and having warning labels on these medications. So I appreciate the fact that you have the courage to talk about these issues. What do we do in terms of regulatory reform? Because clearly that's an area we need to focus on. And I ask that tongue in cheek because I'm very well aware of the fraud, corruption, racketeering, harm, and price fixing that pervades big pharma to a large extent, and of course conflicts of interest and revolving door and all of that stuff. So the first thing is regulatory reform. Is it a pie in the sky? Are we at the point in our history now, given what we faced the last 2 years, where people are serious about regulatory reform and taking a stand? And the second is in terms of data collection. So in South Africa, I'm the head of an organization that's collecting independently adverse effects from these inverted commas vaccines. I believe it's the first one globally. And We know that lies are, being perpetuated. Sorry, I see a screen coming up there. That the government regulators are lying about the adverse effects that people are experiencing, which is exactly why we have an alternative reporting system. So the second question is, what kind of data collection and analysis systems exist in particular for psychiatric medication that you're aware of and we could potentially look into? And then very, very last, the third one is to say that, is there any data on country by country levels of violence when compared to the levels of antidepressants and SSRIs that people are taking? Something like that would be very helpful. In a country like South Africa, for example, where withdrawal from the medication because the hospital's fallen apart due to our economics here means that you have people walking around potentially violent and suicidal, and that could explain so much about what it is we face in our country. So if you could just talk to me about those 3 points, and then I'll extend the invitation: regulatory reform, data collection, and country by country analysis. Thank you, Dr. Healy.
One quick thing is, while I have used the SSRIs as an instance, I'm using them to illustrate how companies handle trials and saying that everything you've seen about the SSRIs is happening in the vaccine trials and the statin trials and the osteoporosis trials. I think Peter Breggin and a few others make a major mistake creating a mental health ghetto. That people, you've got to tell people who don't have a mental health problem, aren't on mental health drugs. These things you're hearing about, the antidepressants and the antipsychotics, apply to every other drug and vaccine as well. It's an all of us together thing. It's not a how can we do the best possible thing for people who've got mental health problems? Okay. Now, the other thing is, again, I'm not anti-drugs. The situation we've got is this, that a drug and a vaccine are chemicals that come with information. The chemicals will always be risky. You really can't change this. The information has got degraded across the board, not just mental health, vaccines, everything else. And that's where we need to focus on, trying to get the information better than it was. In terms of regulation, the thing we've got to think about is, part of the problem here is a delegated narcissism problem, which is we're all acting like children and thinking daddy when we go and stand on the cliff edge and look out at the sunset and the sun's going down, it's spectacular, and we say, daddy, can you do that again? Because we think he's all powerful. The extraordinary thing about it was when FDA passed the 1962 Act, FDA were regarded as a bunch of bureaucrats that nobody really wanted to have anything much to do with medicine. The people who were really shaping how we view drugs and reporting hazards were doctors. We've now got this extraordinary situation where doctors are acting like FDA and MHRA are daddy who will tell us what to do. And that's part of the problem. And that's not a problem that's going to be solved by more regulation. In a sense, we don't need more regulation. We just need the law. We need to charge people with fraud. We need to, have legal cases where there are fraud charges. And we need to let the wider public know that, you've been asked to swallow a lie. And we want them to become active in demanding a change, which shouldn't be more regulation, because part of the problem is companies have a lot more resources than us. I mean, we need some regulation on the road. We have to have regulations about which side of the road the cars drive on. But companies have a lot more resources than us. And if we make the rule book bigger and bigger and bigger, they can commandeer the rule book. There's an old Chuang Tzu phrase about this, which is, if there's thieves around, it makes safe to lock up your belongings, the things you value a lot, in a safe, put loads of locks on it, tie it up in chains and bolts and ropes and things like that. But if a strong thief comes along, he will pick it all up and put it on his back, and his only fear will be that your ropes and bolts will give way. So that's the problem we've got,
Okay.
Thanks very much. I just want to follow up with the invitation, and that is to say, I would very much like to interview you on my Drugs, Politics and Power series. I will send you an invitation, and I'd also like to invite you to speak at the World Council for Health. So please look out for that email, and thank you very much for your contribution to Science for Humanity, I'd like to say.
Let me just quick here. When you asked the question first, I thought about something and I forgot about that, which is you asked me about what to do about this thing, et cetera, et cetera. I've got a book which came out recently about all this, and I can email it in PDF form. So you can see how I think the problem we've got evolved and the situation we're in now. But I don't have any wonderful answers to it. I lay out the problem, and I'm not sure we're going to solve it, but hey.
Maybe we'll invite David Wiseman to the conversation and then figure things out. Thanks very much.
Okay, so before David, Kurt had a question, and then David.
So I wanted to thank Norm for making this possible, and David for just some really great information. I'm just curious about this business of ghostwriting these studies, and I posted a little link to an October 29, 2021 study where the CDC is claiming that among adults hospitalized with COVID-19, they find that the unvaccinated are more likely to be tested positive, using the PCR test, which I think is a ridiculous question to be asking in the beginning. But my point is, if you look at the top line of this article, there are scores of authors that are listed. And my question is, did any of these people actually participate? How could we know that there really are the authors? Yeah. It sounds to me like there's a good chance they're not.
Loads of people have asked this question and tried to work out, is there an app or an AI technique or whatever that can comb through papers and work out whether they're ghostwritten or written by a real human? Well, they're all written by a real human being, but whether they're ghostwritten, they've got a continuity of style that you wouldn't normally have if you have a bunch of people actually writing the article. And no one has really answered that one. Now, I think you have to assume, and I don't know about CDC, but you have to assume that in every article about an on-patent drug, that it's ghostwritten. And in 100% of cases, there's no access to the data. One of the phrases I usually use, which is that Donald Trump got one thing wrong, which is about fake literature. He didn't spot that the greatest concentration of fake literature on earth centers on the drugs your doctor gives you.
Right.
You've got to assume they're all ghostwritten. Now, these days, they will often say, like the Pfizer article says at the end, who wrote it? It's people from ICON that wrote the article. They actually state that in the small print. Nobody goes to look at that. So in a lot of cases, it's there. And ghostwriting isn't all bad. I mean, they do a good job, but they see themselves as reining in the marketing departments of the pharmaceutical companies who might want to say wilder things. And on the other hand, producing an article much quicker than the average academic would. So they have a clean conscience, and they're usually great writers, and they've got PhDs often and things like that. So it's not entirely an evil. It's just if we don't have access to the data, then the ghostwriter can be a little more relaxed, saying that whatever she writes, it's usually a lady, whatever she writes, you're not going to be able to check it up. If she knew you were able to look at the data and see whether you thought how she represented the data was fair or not, she'd probably do a better job, and she'd probably ask herself to see the raw data. She doesn't see the raw data. She gets fed data from the contract research organization.
Well, that undercuts the whole proposition then. And apart from the fact that they're portraying these articles as being endorsed or signed off on by all of these people with important letters after their names.
One more quick thing to throw in here, which may interest you. There's the authorship of the article, but there's multiple layers of authorship. The first act of authorship is coding.
Sure.
Coded the adverse events, leaving some out maybe. Once it coded them, often the story is told.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
See what's been coded. And ultimately, I was asked about evidence-based medicine and am I reverting to a pre-evidence-based medicine kind of thing? I would say that the data is people. People are the data in clinical trials. Not just the figures, but I want to be able to get access to you if you're in the clinical trial of an SSRI. The Hamilton rating scale scores look like the drug worked wonderfully well for you, et cetera, et cetera. I want to be able to call you up and actually call you and ask you, are you wife?
Sure.
Do these rating scale scores represent what happened to you? And you may end up saying, hell no. I mean, I can see why if they asked me those questions, why they got the score they did, but I couldn't make love from the first pill I took. The minute the trial was over, I stopped. There's no earthly way I would use these things again. It's you're the data. People are the data. The judgment calls that you make and I make, and we jointly make, that are the bedrock of the science we're doing. It's not a bunch of figures that we can put through an algorithm and.
Sure. So is your PDF book, is it widely available somewhere that you were talking about?
Well, it's in hard copy and it's in Kindle.
Okay.
Free gift. I can give you a PDF which looks good. It's color and everything, so it looks good. But
right.
Thank you. David Wiseman.
To buy the book, that's fine. But I'll give you guys a big one.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Well, thank you. You've really raised a lot of very important questions, and obviously there's a number of people in the group here that don't have familiarity with how clinical trials are run and the process of how they get reported, which I think is really crucial to understand. And I've been on all sides of that story, and so I want to give you a little bit of a perspective to answer some of the questions that have been raised and comment on the points that David has mentioned. So there's nothing inherently wrong with ghostwriting, nothing inherently wrong with any system, actually. At the end of the day, it comes down to the honesty and the integrity of whoever it is running it. And I just looked quickly at the Thomas paper, the main Pfizer pivotal study that you put up earlier, and typically you're going to have, I mean, a study as complex as this, under the best circumstances, where you have 40,000 patients and dozens of clinical investigative study sites all around the world, a number of investigators at each site, as well as statisticians and other people who are doing lab work and so on and so forth that are connected with the trial. All those people at some point, there's rules about this, but basically they probably qualify for authorship under the sort of generally accepted rules about who should be an author on a paper and who shouldn't. And so it is common to see, a cast of millions sometimes on these types of things. And sometimes it's handled with a core group. And then at the end it says, and the so-and-so, Pfizer vaccine study group, or some other name they come up, a cute acronym of a name that they come up with. So of course, not everyone can actually write the paper, but they've all got to sign off on it. And the rules in general on the so-called good journals, whether the New England Journal of Medicine actually qualifies for that title any longer, I'm not entirely clear. Well, I'm very clear. But the authors, there should be some kind of declaration of which authors did which parts of the study and so on. But it does include people who on the commercial clinical trial sites, as a quick glance would have it. And so, as someone who has been in this situation in the company, headed up a research program that's been responsible for getting clinical trial data out into the open, we've got a challenge. On the one hand, I can say, for the most part, the medical doctors who are on the clinical trials, some of whom we only put there because they're the president of some, scholarly society, or they're going to stand up at the big meeting and present the results or whatever. But we do include them in the study. But other than the fact that they were the president of some prestigious organization, they might not have been on the study otherwise. But so that is certainly something that everyone does. And if you genuinely involve them in the study and they genuinely have input into the design or the analysis or the interpretation or whatever, I certainly want to include those people, and I value their opinion. But for the most part, none of those people have the time or the expertise or the skills in many cases to actually write a paper of any complexity, especially this one. So as someone who led research teams, I I was reluctant to put that sort of task into the hands of any doctor, with few exceptions. There were some that I really could trust, and I felt they were good scientists as well as excellent clinicians to be able to write such a paper. But I ended up writing papers on my, I wrote most of it with input from lots of people, but was very careful to make sure that the data were accurate. And I actually caught other people red-handed, basically manipulating other doctors. I'm not talking about company people. I'm talking about other consultants who had undisclosed conflicts of interest. Okay, and might have been getting a share of the profits or something which was undisclosed. And that was in the old days. Now that you have to disclose everything. But I was probably one of the few that took actions 25 and plus years ago and said, no, we can't have people writing papers for other doctors who are eminent professors themselves, and the other professors think, well, the sun shines out of his where. So that was a problem, and it may still be a problem. Okay, but I've caught people red-handed doing, misrepresenting data, being very generous with the interpretations, all the sorts of things that David was mentioning, in his talk, illustrated by the psychotropic types of drugs that occurs everywhere. So the problem is not in who writes the study, and I think it's perfectly legitimate. This is a Pfizer study. It was sponsored by Pfizer. There are Pfizer people on the paper who legitimately contributed to the science, the design of the study, and they should be authors. They absolutely should be authors. So there's no pretense about that. Okay. The question is, well, exactly what are they doing, and what are they reporting? What are they not reporting? Is it hidden? Is it buried in the supplemental appendix? Is it in data that you can't get your hands on? And and all those questions that David mentioned, and those are things that we're seeing time and time again in these COVID-related studies, whether they're to do with hydroxychloroquine or the vaccines, or I'm not even calling them vaccines. I'm calling them quasi-vaccines. Okay, quasi-vaccines. I think we got to like. They are vaccines of a type, but I think we should call them quasi-vaccines, and you can work out why I'm going to say that in a moment. So I think it's important for people to understand that you just say it's ghost written. That's not necessarily a pejorative statement. I think you've got to understand. Okay, was it honestly written? So, for example, in the Pfizer study, the one that David put up, I think it says on that study, it says it's a randomized study, okay? And only when you go into the appendix, I think it is, or somewhere else, you find out it's an observer randomized study, okay? So yes, it is randomized, but you have to go really look for it to find it's observer randomized, okay? I think the other way around. I think that is stated in that study. It's the children's study of the Pfizer vaccine, quasi-vaccine, where you have to go really look for it. So there's a lot of things that the company have done, I would say, are a little bit naughty, which you could say were oversights. But when you do it, when you have a lot of little bit naughty kinds of things and they add up, it makes you sort of scratch your head. And then the next question is, okay, well, why isn't the peer review picking this up? Okay, and so you mentioned the New England Journal of Medicine particularly, and I will mention them particularly because I've had my own experiences with them, and I know other people have had similar experiences where we found absolute errors. I mean, factual errors in papers to do with hydroxychloroquine and others, where Eric Rubin will not budge. I mean, these are on their own Surgisphere-like issues, all on their own, and the fact that he sits on the vaccine advisory committee for the FDA. Right, where now he has an even bigger conflict of interest, because they have to consider the totality of evidence in the committee, and he has access to totality of evidence. He has all the papers that have been submitted, or letters to the editor that have been submitted that he's rejected, and he should be reporting those to the committee. Otherwise, he shouldn't be on the committee. And for him to say, as he did on October the 26th. We won't know how safe the vaccine is until we start using it in children. Okay, in general, that's a true statement for any drug, because even under the best circumstances, under the best conducted studies, with maybe only a few thousand patients, you're not necessarily going to know what's what's going to happen until you start using in thousands and thousands or millions of patients. But here in this case, we know we already have signals for various reasons, myocarditis and many other things, okay, where that statement is particularly abhorrent. But where it's even more abhorrent is on October the 27th, and probably less than 24 hours after he made the statement, in some journal that I'll let you guess which one it is, okay, appeared a paper on the safety adverse events on the Pfizer vaccine, where there was pretty degranularized data by age, but nonetheless we could still calculate certain things. The very next day, in his own journal, right, his own journal, he's publishing data where we could actually derive some safety information. Okay, you think that's coincidental? Well, also coincidental was on September the 17th, when the booster dose meeting took place, FDA advisory meeting, where they considered greatly the Israeli data, okay, which was really became the star of the show, even though it shouldn't have been. Okay, guess which journal? And guess which journal those data appeared 2 days before, right? The FDA meeting, the New England Journal of Medicine. And if you think that's a coincidence, on October the 15th, when they considered the Janssen booster dose, right, and there was a presentation from a professor at Harvard somewhere on immunological markers, he actually said that morning, and yes, and all this data I'm presenting has appeared this morning in, guess which journal? The New England Journal of Medicine. Okay, so we have three coincidences. Wow, I'm going to go to Las Vegas on that. Okay, because that's incredible, and so it's been long said by Richard Horton and Richard Smith, different editors of Sirius, Marcia Angel, Jerome Cassira, previous editors of the New England Journal of Medicine, that these journals are the marketing arm of the pharmaceutical industry. Their information or data laundries or whatever you want to call them, okay? And the peer review that I've seen has been absolutely abominable. I mean, why aren't they picking up this stuff? Well, they're just blind to it. And we've caught out the New England Journal of Medicine. I caught them out on my things, Annals of Internal Medicine with a certain other thing, JAMA, certain other things, and this is pervasive. So this is not just there's a systematic problem, that's been sort of creeping up on us for years. Yes, that's true, but we have here a really massive, breakdown in peer review. And Eric Rubin wrote an article, an editorial a year ago, attacking the Trump administration for its handling of the pandemic, and the article was titled, the editorial was titled something like "Dying in a Leadership Vacuum." And he talks about how the FDA has been subverted to political whims and CDC has been subverted to political whims. Well, the same is true today. So I can't offer you a solution to this, but we've got a massive breakdown in our scientific in our scientific basis that has been slowly eroding away over many years for all the reasons that David mentions. But now it's come to a real head, and we have a really serious problem. So we've got to get this out. Before we even talk about, we can talk about specifics of the data. That's a whole, that's another 3 hours on its own. But this particular point that you're making, David, I think it really has to come out in a much more concerted way. And and I've spoken to Bree Dreesen. She's had a whole correspondence with the New England Journal of Medicine, and I know of like Hervé Seligman and Pierre Corey and Tess Laurie, and go down the list of people who've had Jessica Rose, of course, all kinds of problems with major journals. Okay, that they are all corrupted into the system. This is a huge problem. We've got to get this out.
To add quickly to the point you made, David, it's not industry or evil. Most of what I've told you about has come from whistleblowers from within industry. They're the ones who've had the courage to get the documents out and things like that. It's also come from the media. It's not, the people patients think are keeping them safe. Doctors are the ones who are missing in action. And, and again, to come back, given the lack of access to the data that David has outlined, the only point where we have access to data is when a doctor bumps into a patient. That's the point where everything is there and they've both got time to think it over, can consult colleagues, bring all sorts of people into the frame. That's the scientific moment we've got. It'd be great if we can improve on that, but at the moment, the clinical trials that are being done aren't helping us improve on that.
Okay, well, thanks very much. I think it's now been going for almost 2 hours, and there aren't any more hands up. I'm sure lots of people would have liked to have discussed more things, but I think that you'll be. I know you'd be happy to take email questions and anything like that. And if anybody needs any contact details, then they can ask me for that. And I'm sure that this discussion is going to continue. I mean, it has to continue basically, otherwise we're all up the, we're all going to be in deadly danger, aren't we? So thank you very much.
If any of you can, I mean, I will get this recorded. I'll get a link to you of the recording. If you can actually spread that and the text of the talk, which I'll get you, and the slides and anything else. I mean, if you want, the ghostwriting article from Rocher from Pfizer and things like that, and the article we did on that, I can give you that and everything else.
That would be great. And we will definitely get that as spread widely as possible. Thank you very much. And thanks everyone for joining.